I initiated, so I think I should record. Okay, let me start over again. This is the first time I do this. Okay, this is the whole picture. And you see, first I visualized the whole stream. Is it sharp?
Yes.
From
resources, production, products, logistics, distribution, consumption, and disposal.
Yes. So, and then it's about, the problem was the transport, because it got stuck in Europe due to all the traffic and all that. So there's too much people doing the same thing. And then you can discuss it. You can discuss it on a very detailed level, making better cars, better parts. Or you could suggest, okay, we can have other means of transport. Or you can say, okay, maybe, what does he say? We could talk about this concept of mobility as a whole. You see that? And then people say, oh, well, maybe we have to talk about the whole structure, the whole system. We could put the factories and houses more together. Or then, okay, well, and I have to rethink the whole European system, the sixth person says. So there's basically a change of perspective you can take. You can take it at high level or low level, depending on what the ladder you can, on details, it's a matter of perspective you take. And then I described it all, excuse my voice, but it basically comes down to comparing three things. It's weight, distance, and volume you talk about. So this is basically a way of capturing a whole problem, a whole in one picture, and enabling the people to talk about it and be aware of what position they take and what part of the conversation they choose. So this is a way. This is a way for me to make. This was for a lobbying organization from. Let me put this away. Put this back, please. This is just a way to enable people to have better conversations about whatever topic, and this was about this problem then. And this is.
That's wonderful, Harry. The example that I'm aware of is tomatoes. I've heard about the tomatoes. You know, where are most of the tomatoes in Europe? And they're on the road between Portugal and Germany, right? And so there's a continual production line of trucks full of tomatoes at various stages of ripeness, and most of the tomato storage is actually on the road.
Yes,
is my understanding of how that logistical system works. And so the just-in-time delivery to a higher value market is based on the logistics of how many tomatoes we've got in the truck at a particular time and where they're going to. And obviously that distribution system, so your stock is almost always in flow.
Yes. There's continuous flow of food.
Then if there's anything goes wrong, it disrupts the flow, you've got a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but this one is this one's printed quite large, and I do a lot of recording and sketching and facilitating, or sometimes starting. Also, this one I start with nothing, trying to understand, and by drawing it, you have a shared, laterally shared frame of reference. And
exactly, and you have seen similar in what I'm doing, except mine are more conceptual, and many people don't see themselves in the picture immediately, whereas what you've done is draw real people, and I can't draw real people.
So I can teach you. It's easy.
Yeah, wonderful, because I'm drawing the conceptual system, and there's an elegant simplicity to it. But many people's eyes glaze over because they see it as complex, because they can't see themselves in it.
Well, that's
so part of my challenge. Yeah, and if I do it in real time, and I can do, it sounds like some of what you do in real time. As 20 people introduce themselves at the start of a meeting, I can stand at a whiteboard and draw their relationships based on my assumptions, and then turn the board around and say, so this is what I thought you said. It looks like you three guys are similar and you girls are different, and this is how you connect, and here's your value chain, here's your logistics. This is how you currently relate. Wow. Where are these people? And so I'm sensing there's people that should be in the room that aren't there, that aren't in the microcosm that's represented. And so I'm showing connections, I'm showing gaps in real time, but I'm not presenting it as the answer. I'm saying this is my best real-time interpretation of the map Now help me correct the map. And when I do it like that, they get it because they can see themselves in the picture. But when I bring that map then to other people, you've got to get past the initial reticence of people to accept that somebody else could have possibly thought about this because I know my system better than anybody else. And each of them has their own perspective. I drive a truck, I drive a boat, I have a tomato plant, I have a whatever, and I know the system, and yet none of them have actually put it together in one place and said, and here's how they currently interact, here's where the problems are, here's where the opportunities are, here's an alternative pathway, and here's a different way to look at the system and potentially find new ways through in terms of logistics. And so this is where I think I see the similarity between your work and mine. It's that ability to conceptualize and then re-represent on behalf of the whole, our best picture. It's then how do you get past the barriers of belief in those who think they already know better than what's just been drawn in a way that doesn't threaten them, but is actually enabling them to see how their part fits into the whole. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm impressed.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, that makes it hard because when you then, when you present your pictures, people can go, oh yeah, I can see that. It's a real case example for a real situation with real people, and I can see myself in box number 3 or in person number 3, right?
Well,
when I do it, I then have to present it as a map to people who haven't seen the work in progress. And so they go, oh, you never get away with presenting that in my community. And I say, I wouldn't do that. I'm just showing you this is the thinking behind how I would engage. I wouldn't necessarily show them the whole map. I'm showing you the map because I think you understand what we're talking about. But unfortunately, most times they don't. They think they do, but they don't. And so it's what you and I are both doing, I think, is rich pictures in a systems context. We're creating the possibility of a deeper, richer story than with a common narrative than most of the existing players will have, and yet each of them will see their part of it. And it's like that picture of the elephant, with the 7 people describing the piece of the elephant blindfolded. Oh, it's like a piece of rope. No, it's like a big it's like a big carpet. No, it's like a snake. And so none of them can see the whole. And I think you and I are both conceptually bringing the whole into being on behalf of the multiple individual pieces.
Yes. And the similarities and the differences are very interesting between you and me.
Yes.
It's lovely to explore that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I did some work with Matt and Gail Taylor in a design shop in Sydney, and they have a process they call Design Shop, and it has multiple means of engaging with a microcosm of carefully chosen people. And in our case, it was to do with trying to find faster ways to address brain cancer. And so we had pharmaceutical companies, we had surgeons, we had brain surgeons, we had researchers, we had survivors, we had the carers of people that hadn't survived, doctors, nurses, you name it, about 40 people. And I was a wild card entrant to bring my capacity to re-articulate in systems context and just be me in the room. There was another guy like me, a chap called Daryl Taylor, who's also very good at this thinking outside the box and then bringing back a different synthesis. And the reason I'm mentioning this to you is because what they do is use magnificent, beautifully designed curved whiteboards. And these whiteboards are architectural masterpieces. You put 3 of them together and you've got 120 degrees to wrap around a room, right? And so you can put these back to back as a series of individual whiteboards, or turn them around into a big arc, and now you've got a presentation space for multiple joined up pieces for a group of 40 or 50. And I met a couple of graphic artists there. One of the chaps there was a chap called Fern Lacuna, and he was just brilliant at his capacity to articulate in diagrams, with those beautiful 3D arrows and vision statements and clouds on the horizon, the sun rising, and helicopters flying over. And so I wish I had that graphic expression capability, because I think it would give me that extra strand beyond my ability to capture in real-time words into diagrams that more, I guess, humanly or humanely connect.
Yes, that's a very interesting point there, indeed. There are, well, when I started this work, I thought I was the only guy on the planet who was kind of the wild card, as you put it. Yeah. So and
we're both wild cards, mate. Are you a joker or?
Yeah, I can be a joker.
Pick up three. Pick up three is my. People have to pick up 3 cards to probably get what the one card I played was supposed to be.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it started. So many in my head, but we have an interesting capacity indeed, and it needs some work to be accepted in the room. That's something we could discuss, and how to play that role. And it's also interesting that you have experienced other graphic facilitators, and so you must have also experienced the synergy between you guys. Hopefully, you could talk to that a little more, and also you're taking abstract. You named re-articulating in words, but also writing it down. As I saw you on a picture of you with a whiteboard as well, so we can talk to that and write down. So that kind of closes into what we do. And the next step is diagramming. You do a lot of diagramming, and it's very nice. I think they are indeed very rich, and that has a problem also with my pictures. There's so much in it that people cannot recognize what it's about, because they glaze over, as you said so nicely. So that's a problem. And then that's what I like about comics. I did pictures for the customs in the Netherlands, explaining their system. So I pictured the whole system, but later I made a comic, because I had to lead the users to the system. So that you can picture by picture, you can give the whole picture, but you also can take parts of it and connect the story to it. So pictures and words and stories and diagrams are all different parts of the way that we try to conceive what it's about, and make it available to first the people in the conversation, and then later, and that was this kind of work I showed you, to people outside. So people can, that's a nice, what I like about my work, I make a representation, and then the client can take the representation and make it his own, and I'm at my best as they forgot that I contributed. So, this is great. Yeah, this is exactly what I want to say. This is how I see it, and they take it away, and they kind of steal it, and then I'm done. But sometimes it works the way that they even forget about me, and even forget that I contributed value. But on the other hand, they also hire me when things get totally stuck and they don't see the trees through the forest anymore.
I think that's a really important point you just made. I love all the points you've made, and I'll come back to those if I could. The one I'm really interested in is that one you were mentioning, and I think I heard you say in one of the videos that you sometimes see yourself as a helicopter, zooming in, zooming out, or a telephoto lens. I think a camera was your analogy. And same with me. I can zoom into the absolute detail, but I get bored quickly with the expert detail that I know others more easily carry. And so why would I have to know all of this if somebody is already in the room? My job is to turn them on so they contribute at the right time.
Great.
So the generalist perspective, the neo-generalist and the connective perspective is so critical. And yet you need to understand enough about the topic to be able to articulate it. But when you're articulating it, you're doing it with a humility of not being the expert. But some people perceive that if you're talking about it, you're assuming you're the expert. And that's a barrier immediately, because they think, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's trying to tell us how to do, teaching us how to suck eggs. And you go, no, asking you, is this how you suck eggs?
Oh,
And
well, you just mentioned Joker. I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is a point that I always come in as a guy who doesn't know anything. I just am here. I'm
exactly.
in front of the board, if I'm lucky, and I say, "This is here I am, and what is this about?" I know nothing. So you guys own the content. I just try to capture it and visualize it. And I come back to the story I tell the most. That was when terrorism happened for the first time in the USA. Then all the governments suddenly had to have a policy about terrorism. It didn't exist as a topic before. And
Yes.
and I was at that point working with a government-related institution in the Netherlands, and it was about defense. And also they had worked with me, and they invited me to kind of visualize what this was about. And I was in the room with very high officials and people from the army and all that. And I just had one huge whiteboard and a black marker, and they were all being very important, and with their egos and their documents and their plans and all that. And I was just there, and I said, "Okay, what is this about?" And I did, and that's indeed very powerful in the approach. I just drew one little character on the board. So this is here. This is the terrorist you're talking about. Then who is he? Where is he? And all that. So there was, of course, like this bomb throwing Arab kind of type of guy. But we don't need to go into all those details. But I asked, where is he? Well, he's outside the Netherlands. So I drew the Netherlands next to it, and then I drew the government ivory tower at the right spot, and I said, okay, this is where you are. This is where the guy. What else is important? Oh, it's about infrastructure. It's about customs. It's about police. So I drew everything in, and then we filled in the whole. We kind of mapped out the whole topic. But the nice thing is they got from behind the desks pointing at it and trying to discuss, and the whole dynamics changed. And it was all about, is this the proper picture? Is it the proper representation of what we want to talk about? And once that was done, they kind of got so sucked in, and they started drawing themselves and pointing at. So at that point, I was basically done. And that was.
Yes, it's a wonderful gift, because you're unlocking the emergent potential in the room.
Yes,
you're allowing this to see more of itself. And
nice thing
Nora
about I became aware of that. People, when they talk about things like you just described, what we all do, you zoom in, zoom out, and people fly around it, and that's not true, but from another perspective, it is true, and then I can see it's. Yes. They're like the elephant. They fly around the elephant, and yes. And they all talk about the thing they see. And when you start drawing, that's what drawing does. It's a frozen perspective. You can only draw from one point at a time, and so you have one perspective, and you kind of finish the whole drawing before you change perspectives or go to the next drawing. So then people are always forced to look at it from this one perspective and make it complete and get all the details and all the relevant stuff on the right size, with the right connections, and then I can change it on the whiteboard until it fits. And that's the way you make a very consistent representation from whatever.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that, my experience of this is that you're not necessarily just providing one perspective, but you're providing one focal point.
Yes,
but then you're enabling multiple perspectives of that one focal point. Yes. And in doing that, people know they've got a single anchor, and then they're looking at it from different perspectives, and then they recognize, we're all talking about the same thing, therefore I can now mutually respect your perspective of this one thing, because at least we're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
And to reach that agreement, and this is where you'll be doing it as well, I would imagine, you're reading that aha moment in the room. So you're reading the body language and the change in stance when they suddenly realize that they actually are legitimized in having different perspectives of the same thing. It's not competing answers for the same perspective.
No, it's just adding up and contributing.
Exactly. And I've had some wonderful experiences of that, and I use my diagrams. I was in the room with about 10 people at a conference, and one of the diagrams that I've put up on the Global Challenges Foundation site and various other places is that one of two axes, sorry, I'm too close, two axes and reaching agreement and certainty. So in the bottom corner, you've got order, and here you've got socially complicated, and here you've got technically complicated, and out here you've got complex.
Yes, I know that one.
And in the corner where everybody's agreed and everybody's certain, that's order, because we all know and we're all sure, right? And we all agree that's what we're looking at. So we're looking at the cup, or we're looking at the tomato, or we're looking at the ship, right? So we know what we're talking about. But then there's the social complexity of multiple perspectives of that, and there's the technical complexity of how does it actually work. And some people know this without knowing that, and some people know this without knowing that, and yet the reality is the whole system is moving. So it doesn't matter how good the ship is if the storm is bigger than the ship was designed for, right? And so when you bring that complex perspective, I did that diagram because there were 10 people talking at cross purposes in the room, and each of them thought they had the answer, and none of them could hear the others because they assumed they were all wrong. And after listening and trying to raise my hand, because I was the junior person, even though I was older than many of them in the room, I was the junior person with regard to the assumed knowledge. I drew it on a piece of butcher's paper and just lay it quietly, didn't say a word, right in the middle of the table, and then just sat back. And everybody started to look at this piece of paper and go, hang on a minute, eventually click, what are you doing here, Neil? I said, well, it sounds, from where I'm standing, I can hear multiple different perspectives of this issue, and it depends on where you are in this frame. Can you see where you're coming from? Because I can sense where you're coming from, but why don't you tell me? So I then went around the table, where do you think you're coming from? Oh, I'm pretty good at this. Right, now, do you recognise that with the diversity of views in this room, we can have a much richer picture if we actually stopped arguing about what we were talking about and actually started talking about what we were arguing about. And so suddenly it flipped it. But again, they don't realise you've done it because they're in the room, they're the experts. And so there's a humility and a nobility. And this is the conversation I was having with Gavin in London. The humility, the nobility of bringing something honourably to the table in a way that respects the whole system. The humility of doing it without wanting to claim the expertise or the credit. And so, and the example we used was, Aboriginal peoples in Australia, regarded as noble savages by the British and other invaders that came to our country. And so there was the nobility that they saw in the savage, who was supreme in his environment. What they didn't realise was that nobility didn't come with a title. That nobility came with the humility of recognising I am part of a bigger system. And so they governed the whole system. They didn't come in to impose their nobility on the system or their assumed nobility. I know that's really powerful. That came out of the conversation with myself and Gavin. And when you walk into a situation with that humility, it's a very different dynamic you're bringing. But there are times you have to assert yourself to get through the cacophony of voices who all think they're the experts, because you're actually bringing something which is going to change the way that they relate to each other for the benefit of the whole system. But if they're all locked in their patterns, nothing will change. And then you walk away and you've wasted all your time and energy, and everybody's just wasted a whole bunch of time.
Yes.
And so the example of that I had that was beautiful was in one of the communities I went to, testing one of my engagement models in New South Wales, southern New South Wales on the Murray River. And in this community, my friend Michael Fortunato from the United States, he was the head of rural research at Sam Houston University. He sat down and he had his slide projector, and he was actually standing up with his slide projector talking to about 30 people in the room. And there was a lot of resistance from the room. It was fairly evident about 3 slides in. They were there to fight, not to watch a presentation from another expert. So he turned off the projector, turned his seat around, sat legs astride, put his arms on the back of the chair and said, right, can we have a conversation? And I said, well, Michael, if you're going to turn your chair around, perhaps we can get these people to come in a bit closer and put a bit of a circle up. So they sat in a circle, and so suddenly now they can see each other rather than just the back of each other's heads. And instead of arguing, now they have to watch each other say stuff and listen to what the other's saying. And Michael said, so what is it you guys like about your community? And some wise crack said, oh, we don't like it here, mate, we love it here. So I drew a little red heart on the board. Just a little tiny red heart on the board. And every time the conversation progressed, and I was standing at the whiteboard, the heart just got a bit bigger and then a bit bigger, and I kept colouring it in. And the people that were sitting closest could see that there's this 6'8" white guy standing out the front drawing a heart on the board in a farming community. And it's getting bigger. And so there's this little bit of magic going on. There's people going, what the hell? This is not what we thought it was about, you know? And so it was just an intuitive thing to do. I just drew this heart. The heart got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, after about 10 minutes, I said, Michael, do you realise how much love there is in the room? And I went around and said, when Michael asked you, you said, no, we love it here. When he said, what do the tourists like? You said, no, they love it down by the river. You know, what do they come here for? Oh, they love the weather. Oh, they love this. I said, do you realise how much love there is in the room? And the whole room just cracked up laughing, looked at each other and realised, shit, we're all in this together. We love this place. Now what are we going to do about it? And it flips the thing from a competitive, we're here to boot you out because the immune system is getting so strong. You look like an expert and we've got to get rid of you because all the bastards who come in here look like experts. They always screw us over. They don't listen. They don't learn. And we have to retrain them every time. So they came for a fight. Within half an hour, they're going, wow, this is different. And so that I used a little tiny bit of visual magic, but also the capacity to hear into what was coming, the common thread coming through underneath. And I'll play that card again, but I didn't know I was going to play that card when I did it. So it's an emergent property of the conversation. Because I'm standing there thinking, how the hell are we going to handle this bunch of recalcitrant farmers who don't want us to be here? And we're just the best show in town tonight. They've all got beers in their hands. They just want to have a fight. And so my sense is that both you and I are providing those visual cues that change the conversation by focusing it, but also allowing it to be zoomed in, zoomed out. And in that zooming in and zooming out,
another part of the presence. You engage another part of presence, quite neurologically. You put from the neocortex into the visual part of the brain, so people use a far richer part of their possibilities, and they see it and they sense it, and they connect that way too. So they change.
That's a beautiful way to put it. There's a chap called David Engwich who comes from my region here, Southeast Queensland, and he's done a lot of work on traffic calming and traffic planning. And I understand in the Netherlands they have I think it's VUNERT, is it the VUNERT, the shared pedestrian and traffic walkways in the Netherlands, where in this space you have to be careful because there can be cars and there can be people.
Yes.
So it's not separate the cars from the people so both can do their thing. It's in this space, it's a more emergent space.
Yes.
And so I can weave the emergence element into that. He speaks about mental speed bumps. And so he said, instead of putting up a sign which says, slow down, you bastards, it's 40 kilometres an hour here, right? Put a kid's tricycle up in a tree, right? Because the 40 kilometre sign is telling somebody who's a road warrior, you have to slow down. And I'm stopping you from doing what you came here to do. And you're in charge of your 1,500 kilograms of steel at this moment, and I'm telling you to stop doing what you're doing. And that's exactly the wrong brain space, right? Hoist something up into a tree like a kid's tricycle, people switch into storytelling mode. Oh, I wonder what that tricycle's in the tree for. And in that time, they're calmer. They slow down naturally to try and work out what's going on, not I'm in charge. And in that moment of not knowing, they're open to other suggestions like slowing down or thinking more deeply about
the hypnosis moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Say again. Sorry, I missed that. It dropped out. Say again.
It's hypnosis. When people are flabbergasted, what's the word they don't know, that they're open by nature. Oh, something's happening. What's happening? And that moment you can enter new information.
Exactly, and magic is like that. if you know, there's a wonderful show on television called Penn and Teller. Can you still hear me? It says my internet connection's unstable.
I've seen it once, but I don't really know it. No, I've seen some of it.
It's two older, very professional magicians.
Yes.
And they run a show in Las Vegas where they invite other magicians to come and do their performances on stage, and they critique them. But they don't critique them to give away the trick. They critique them in a way that shows we understand how you did that trick. And they use coded language and relate to particular tricks to say, we're pretty sure it was a combination of this and this. And if the person says no, they go, wow, that was pretty special then, because I thought that's what you did. So it's like building code on previous code, but they're not letting the audience know how the trick was done. So the audience comes to see the magic. The experts can see how it was done, right? And the humility of this and the nobility of this is that they don't disclose how it was done, because in that moment of not knowing, the audience is open to multiple alternative possibilities.
That's the liminal space, as they call it. Yes. Cool.
Yeah, it's really
There's
critical,
a lot coming
because
together. Yes.
if you can get people to a point where they don't know what you're going to do next, then you're disrupting coherence compassionately, which is what I try and do. Whether that's with humour, whether that's
beautifully, Neil. Great.
Behaving differently, putting something down they don't expect, and quite often I'll get comments like, I play my slides now more as cards than as a linear progression, because I'm sensing what I think might be the next card to play to get the best outcome for the whole system. Not to take them where I want them to go, but to allow them to go as far as they want to go. And if I haven't got a card, then I'll draw something or speak to them or whatever. But generally, because I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about multiple pathways,
yes,
I use the analogy a bit like I went to university in Townsville in North Queensland, and there's a wonderful big mountain with a big steep cliff up behind the university. And to get to it, you have to walk up a creek with granite boulders, and they're big and small, and some are loose and some are solid. And you can see the narrow gap that you've got to get through 500 metres ahead with, rainforest and lantanas and, things that you can't penetrate on the sides. So you've got to get to that point. But to get to that point, you can take big steps if you can jump across the boulders, or small steps if you have to walk along the rocks. But you can't guarantee the next rock you stand on is going to be stable, because every flood comes and moves them around. So you have to zoom in, zoom out, look up, look down, and you have to be agile. And so as you're running up this creek bed to try and get across as many as you can, any rock could tilt you in a different direction. Now you're no longer on the linear path. You're still aiming for the same objective, but now you've had to change your angle, and everything is now adjusting to the balance. And that's what I do with groups. So I had two 70-ish-year-old women from eco-spiritual faiths. They both came from a group called The Grail, based out of Sydney, but it's probably global. And I was running a workshop with them, and on the second morning of this workshop, which I hadn't been expecting to be facilitating, I was assuming I was going to be assisting with the facilitating, but the facilitator couldn't show up. First day, I was being told, by the organisers, this is too complex, Neil. We're never going to get there. This isn't going to work. And so it's all barrier. The stuff you're putting up is too complex. I'm going, it's funny because the others seem to be able to get it. Maybe it's just you that's not getting this. Oh, that's a challenge. It's like, you can't tell me I'm not getting this. And then I had these two women come to me at morning tea on the second day, and they said separately, Neil, do you know what we're going to say next? And they were serious. And I said, no, but I'm pretty sure I know where we've come from. I'm pretty sure I've got a good idea of where we need to be. And I've got a range of things I've thought about how to handle this. I'm just putting the next card or next rock in front of you to step onto. And because I've got it on an electronic medium, this is what you'd be doing as well. Because I've got that, if people go, that's not what we want to do, you just wipe it, rub it off the board and draw something different. Or I just go, hang on, sorry, that was the wrong slide, press another slide. And so
you have
there's a little bit of sleight of hand
of thoughts and diagrams that are already ready in order to progress the conversation. So
Exactly.
oh wow! But you
And so it's like a card deck, but you don't know the rules of the game until you co-define the rules. So you don't walk in assuming you're in control.
yeah.
So you say, right, well, we've all got a card deck. What game should we play? Oh, you're going to play poker. I'm not very good at poker, but I think I've got a pretty good hand. I'm pretty sure these are the high cards and these are the low cards.
But this means
let's see what you play first.
Neil, but this you're basically saying you got the what is these cards? Talk about the cards more, because how can you have cards that define any conversation?
Well, it's not to define any conversation, but it's to define a rich picture of the systems context. And this is where the systems thinking comes in. As you said, when you drew that diagram that you showed me at the start with the logistical chain and Europe and so on, so you've zoomed in from the globe to Europe. You understand the problem enough to know the pieces. You've then put them together in a linear fashion that makes sense. You've personalized that with a range of different perspectives, and then you've written the story that matches that picture. Once people have said, yeah, you're broadly on the right track, this is what it looks like. And so that has now become the common story. And so there are multiple common stories that come up, and I don't set out to make it fit a common story. But if you recognise that, ecological limits are being crossed, if you recognise climate is changing, if you recognise, from a geomorphological perspective, geology in landscapes perspective, that water runs downhill. This is how the water cycle works, and this is how the atmospheric cycle works. So the science of understanding how systems work is, I guess, I hadn't thought about it this way before, but it's the underlying DNA, right? Because I hold that so intuitively that when I walk through a landscape, I take it for granted that everybody else knows what I'm seeing. And it's sometimes with amazement that I realise I just pointed out what was happening here, and suddenly there's 20 people on the tour bus going, tell us that again? Why are those cliffs there? Oh, because there's a soft layer underneath, and when the soft layer erodes, the rest of it collapses. When does it collapse? Oh, whenever the gravity gets too much for the fractures in the rock. How does that happen? And so there's this continual unfolding because they're seeing the same landscape, but they don't understand the dynamics. And that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing.
Oh,
and so
talk about what you're doing. You're doing something different than I am here. I'm very interested. I'm very keen to hear that one.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yes,
my sense is if we can put your bit and my bit together,
yes,
we've got a pretty amazing.
Yes, exactly.
Especially we've thought about in advance some of the ways of representing the complexity that's going to come up, and this is where my contemplative space is, that the diagrams that I present, and this is where people assume, oh, Neil, you're presenting somebody else's diagram. No, I'm presenting somebody else's diagram in emergent systems context and showing the next stage and the previous stage. So it's like your logistics chain. You're not just drawing the truck. You're drawing the truck in the right place in the value chain for them to go, oh, that's the truck that carries the tomato. And that's the truck that's going to Antwerp, And so they see it in systems context because you're reading the right moment to play that card.
Yes, but you see the cards, and you know the cards, and you know what a card is basically. Well, take any card. You have a card, and then you know what should be in the card. So that's a frame in itself. You know probably what's in it. And you want to say,
which is like your cartoons.
Yes, but I would like to hear your words. How do you know what to put in the card or what not? And what's the, because it's you have a whole deck, and you have. Good question.
How do you know what to put in a card? Well, I read broadly, but I'm not. I read broadly, but I don't read. I haven't read many books for a long time. I'm reading a lot of shorter articles and scientific papers and so on, and because the distraction economy puts those in front of me. To find the time to read a specific book when I'm a neo-generalist is almost too difficult these days. But the stuff that I was basing some of my initial thinking on were some quite deep texts on resilience theory and systems thinking and so on. And so I've seen a bit of the evolution, but I can also see the stages of arrested development that a lot of thinkers are at. So they'll write a very long book, but at a level that makes sense to people that I no longer walk with. And I can see that there's important elements that those people that are reading that book would get. And then I take it the next stage. So the card I would draw would be to say, how do I capture the essence of the key messages from that important book?
Bingo. That's what you do. This is what you do.
And then take it the next level.
Yes.
So say, if you liked this, then you'll probably like this.
Yes, freeze, please. You're too fast now, because you know you do it. This you'll breathe this. But I think this is a very your specific talent that shines here. That is, you get something, and then you know what to grasp, and you know, say, okay, I have to take this element, as you say it, out and put it on basically frame it then in one of the cards on your desk. But this is I think this is your defining quality, at least one of them, that you know what to take out, know what to distill, and know what to put on the paper in your diagram. And then you get all these elements that define basically the patterns of whatever story you want to convey. Is that correct or not?
And this is the thing, that the humility comes through not having the answer when I walk in.
No.
Right? It's through having multiple pieces of a potential answer that might be of value. But every time I present them, it's to ask the question, is this useful for you in your system's context?
Yes, your ability to create those pieces and to distill those pieces out of everything you see and learn and discover everywhere. Then you say, okay, this is about basically the essential element that the people put forward, and then you put them in a card, and you have all this knowledge distilled into a whole stack of cards. That's what I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, and the challenge is that every audience is different.
Yes,
right? And this is why, and this is where I always get caught out. And I believe I've also been caught out in the Global Challenge Foundation work as well, in that when I present, it looks like an expert presenting in linear fashion.
Yes, I think, yes.
And so I'm not a keynote speaker. I'm a keynote listener.
Yes,
so I listen
I
listen into what's emerging. But if nobody else is speaking and things still need to keep moving, I'll keep presenting. But if people didn't get the first diagram, they're not going to get the second or the third. And especially if they're not responding, you don't know, are they not even seeing this, or are they not recognizing it, or are they actually rejecting it? And so it's not, the challenge I've got is that with the free time that I have, I'm actually trying to enable multiple systems to move forward from wherever they are at, not from where I think they need to be. However, I'm also holding that bigger picture with humility, which is we're all screwed unless we do this better soon, right? And so there's an urgency to this. So when I throw these cards on the table and I get an amazing response, I know I'm in the right room, right? But if I'm in the wrong, oh, sorry, we don't even play that game in this room, mate. Oh, sorry, wrong room. I'll go somewhere else, right? And so the first entry criterion for me is there any resonance with what I've got to bring? Yes. So it doesn't matter if there's not. I'm not going to hang around if there's no resonance and people don't want to hear it. There's no point in standing out the front and making myself uncomfortable and making everybody else uncomfortable. He's still here. You know, it's actually, sorry, wrong room. I thought I was in such and such. You know, I didn't realize this was Systems Thinking 101. I thought it was Systems Thinking 303 or something, you know. However, when I'm in real community that I've been invited into, then I operate according to hearing what they're saying first. So when I went to these communities, it wasn't Neil Davidson to stand up to sell his model to these communities. In fact, those communities never saw my model. But when I talk to systems thinkers and others that are interested in this stuff, I show them the model. And they all go, oh, that'll never work. It's been bloody working. But it's working because I don't put it in front of the people that I'm actually talking with, right? In those communities. I'm listening to where they're at. And I'm intuitively playing at the level of language and the level of understanding that they've got. And I occasionally test a bit further. I'll throw a pebble in the pond a bit further out and see where the ripples go. And if there's a spark of interest in the room, the locals know, oh, wow, that just appealed to Jenny. how come Jenny gets it and I don't get it? And in that moment of not knowing, they're open to learning. But if it's Neil Davidson and they're all against Neil Davidson being in the room because he's this bloody expert from this institution we don't trust anymore, and he's from the government and he's changed the policy to prevent us from getting water from the river, and, then they're going to reject that. The immune system builds up. And so the biggest barrier I have is the assumptions of those who think that they know what I am. Whereas what I'm coming is to learn who they are and how I can help them to do whatever they want to do within a better systems context. But it's not definable by a brief. So you can't write in advance, I'm going to guarantee you that I can get you a more productive business. I'm going to guarantee you that I can get you a better community outcome. I'll guarantee you I'll do the best I can when I'm in your room to allow you to see each other and to recognise in yourselves the capability, capacity, maturity, and the different elements of the elephant that you already have here, because that's what I can do. I can't guarantee that I can give you the answer, but I can help you to define a better answer if you help me to define the systems context. But how do you write that up as a definable product or service? And so the work I've been doing has often been very low cost or very free because it's unsolicited architecture. It's not, I can guarantee how to build a skyscraper. It's, let's work out what sort of building you need here and how are we going to co-design that building. And as you said at the start, if they don't even realise you've been there, you've done your job well. So my key question of survival for my family and mortgage and all those other things is, who supports me while I do the support work for those who can't do it themselves? And it's not to say they haven't got the expertise, because this is operating, if you remember that diagram before, it's operating in the socially complicated realm, but recognising the complexity out here. So it's not agreed and certain, because most of the stuff they're doing that they're already agreed and certain about is not working. These communities are failing because the economy doesn't work. The economy doesn't work because it's based on extraction. The extraction doesn't work because it's based on natural systems that don't have the water in them. The water isn't in the system because we've changed the environment and changed the atmosphere. And so I bring that deep systems understanding of the big picture and different timeframes and resilience. I then tailor it according to what comes up in emergent communities based on who's in the room. And I assist them as far as they can go. And in some cases, that's baby steps compared to others. But, and this is the big but, as you said, when you walk in with a storyboard and put it in front of executives, it might be an example from another industry. But they immediately go, oh, wow, yes, that's the sort of thing we need for us. And then you just go and change the characters a bit, you change the wording on the diagrams, and then they've got the storyboard for their context. And they go, thank you very much, Harry, that was fantastic. That was, we've changed the context. In my case, one community comes up with an answer, which might be the same answer that another community could imagine, but haven't had the time, the energy, or the coherence to put together yet. And so that's one of the other cards you can potentially play, is your experience somewhere else. So when I did this somewhere else, this is what they came up with. But it's not to say you have to do it this way. It's to say, here's an example of one I prepared earlier, right? And again, it's the humility of saying, this is not the answer for you, but have you thought about this? And especially if you go to multiple communities and the same sorts of issues are coming up. And so when we went to 5 communities within, they're probably about 400 kilometres, from one end of along the river, from one place to another place, they wouldn't each know the other communities very well, but they would know them well enough to be able to empathise with them. They would all have their own specific circumstances, but they're all operating in the same government environment, the same physical environment, the same water catchment, etc., etc. So there's some big picture issues which are very similar, and yet the community dynamics will be different in each one. In some communities, they've been there for 50 years, but they're only second generation innovative farmers that came in 1967 to settle a new area that was opened up. In other areas, they've been there since the 1940s, so it's third generation. They came in after the war, or 1920s, so it's fourth generation. So they've opened up these areas. Irrigation, the science has changed, the amount of water's changed, the technology's changed, etc., etc. But some are more innovative and more open-minded, and were selected as a specific tranche of players with specific capabilities to open up a new irrigation area. and others were just the lucky ones that were there first and got in and settled. And then you go back one step further, and underpinning all of this, and this is where the humility and the human health of the system stuff comes in. It was a real eye-opener for me. I was sensing these elements coming through in communities, and again, it's feeling what's coming up in the room, not because I didn't go in there to tell them you need to reconcile the differences between you and the Aboriginal nations you displaced, right? And yet, in these communities, it was becoming obvious that, oh wow, our economy's failing. We need to diversify our economy. I said, so how are you going to diversify your economy? Oh, well, there's tourism, there's ecotourism, there's cultural tourism. So what's your cultural tourism look like? Oh, well, we've got the museum. What's in the museum? Oh, you know, there's artefacts. What sort of artefact? Oh, you know, old ploughs, things like that, things we used to use. Oh, Aboriginal artefacts, almost a throwaway line, you know, because this is a room full of 20 people and they don't want to talk about the Aboriginal artefacts. Where do you get the Aboriginal artefacts from? Oh, you know, come out of the land, we're digging away there and you come up with an artefact and bring it along to the museum, we clean it up, put it on display. Where did the artefacts come from? Oh, yeah. Where did the artefacts come from? You know? And then somebody at the back of the room will say, yeah, we found some artefacts. The whole room goes, oh, what did you do? You know, and they turn to them and say, oh, you know, we thought about whether we should report them up. We did the right thing. We reported them to the authorities. How much land are they going to take? Oh, just a small amount. You know, where? Oh, about 50 metres along the creek, you know, about 10 metres back. How long for? Oh, you know, probably about 3 months. They said they're going to get a team up, come up from Melbourne. They'll do the archaeology, dig it all out, make sure they've got it all mapped out. Oh, great. Yeah, you did the right thing. In that moment, we've just lifted the collective value set from there to there in the room. Because in that moment, multiple individuals who were already thinking this have seen each other think it together. And that sets a new benchmark. You know, an hour later in the same conversation, oh yeah, we found some bones. Bones? Aboriginal? Yeah, probably, pretty old. What did you do? Same set of questions. You know, how much land? Oh, probably 100 metres back from the creek, about 500 metres. It's going to take about 6 months. You know, oh, you did the right thing, you know. And so in that moment, you realise these people, and this is my articulation afterwards, so you're telling me your economy's failing, you need to diversify your economy. You intend to use the cultural artefacts in the museum from the people that existed on the land sustainably for 60,000 years before, with an economy that worked before they were displaced by your ancestors. And it just hits you. Exactly. I'm watching your face. It is so freaking powerful. There's a collective grief in these communities that they can't express. And so my model has healing in it, but I'm not the healer. I'm the one that's surfacing the grief. Then I turn to the eco-spiritual sisters who've walked in these communities for 50, 60, 120 years. And I say, how do we articulate this? How do you bring your healing? But they couldn't walk into the town and say, hi, well, the Sisters of Mercy, we're here to heal you. Because the town rejects religion, because religion's failed them, because the narrative's been wrong and the Pope's trying to change the narrative. And this is the stuff that's coming up in these communities. I'm operating at that interface between broken communities who think they're doing it and institutions who think they're doing it in collapsing systems that won't be there in 50 years, if not 20 years, trying to help them to find better ways forward that actually make sense. But they can't do it because everybody thinks they're already doing it. And so my role is to surface that social fragmentation and that social complexity in ways that allows them to recohere wisely. But to get there, you've got to, disrupt coherence compassionately. So you've got to go in there humble. You've got to say, I don't know what's going to come up, but this is the sort of stuff that's come up before. And on a couple of occasions, I had to assert myself. There was a chap in the room, and it was fairly evident that the community had come out to fight. And in this particular community, I won't name it because it might go further, there was a club, a gambling club and a golf course on the river. And it provides a lot of money for the town and has over many years for sporting clubs and charities and various other things, because people used to come from over the border to gamble in this club, so the money would then be redistributed to the community. And then there's a historic precinct with bridge that can raise to let the old paddle steamers go through, and a beautiful little ferry master's cabin and various other things. And right in the middle of that is a little organic farm run by the school, which breaks the thoroughfare between the bridge and the club. And the school obviously wants to hang on to the organic farm, but if there was a tourist strip on there that actually allowed a more cohesive connection, there'd be more people stopping for longer to do more to bring economy to the town. The town is about to have an overpass built over the river, which is potentially going to take people past them at 120 kilometres an hour. And so they're not going to have an economy because nobody's going to stop unless they can look down and see something on the ground that's worth visiting. So again, it's like show them the strange attractor and see who comes. And there was one guy in the room who was talking about the need to move the school garden, but everybody came to fight him because they thought he was associated with the club. And so after about 2 hours of this guy being derided every time, I said, and we went back to each of these committees 2 weeks apart, and we spent about 3 or 4 hours each, in 2 evenings. And we went into this committee and we had breakfast with him after the first morning. It was evident that he had this deep grief for Aboriginal people because they had found bones in the river when he was a child, and he realised how they disrespected them at the time, put them in a bucket up by the shed. And I had this conversation over breakfast. It was just amazing, this conversation, where there were multiple different perspectives in the room, and I was able to go, wow, to sense into his grief, his sister's sort of less than grief. She was losing some of her mental capacity. The daughter of the sister, who was in her 50s, sort of thinking, oh, this has nothing to do with me, it's not a real problem. And yet this is in the landscape. And so at this particular point in the second workshop, everybody was having a go at this old chap, old Bill, I'll call him, having a go at old Bill. And I said, hang on a second, can I just respect the elder in the room? Now, I've had breakfast with Bill. I know he actually cares about this town more than you might realise. This is not about his fight with the school. This is about what is it you guys are going to do to survive in this place. And if you really cared, you'd be thinking about this seriously. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but he's the only one coming to me with any thought of a designed solution that might attract more people in to improve your economy. Rock back on their heels. And then, this guy's just told us, he's just read the riot act to us about our town. And you can see them going click, 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 but he's bloody right. And they all turn and say sorry to Bill. And so you're holding them accountable to their behaviour on behalf of the whole. And that's governance, right?
Wow.
And so we're bringing governance.
Yes.
Sorry?
I'm very happy this is recorded. You worded beautifully. This is what I do. I sense it. I can't guarantee what's going to happen, right? But I sense it, I feel it, and then I can re-articulate it, and I can challenge it in real time. But those that can't see that I'm doing it assume and project he's being one of these or he's being one of those. They're not seeing that this is actually, no, this is going with the flow. This is in the moment. And I sometimes can't even remember exactly what I said because it's the energy in the room and the body language and the shift, right? And so I just saw sort of go, take a breath in, wow, and I'm sensing that from, up to 50 players, provided I can see them. An imperceptible movement somewhere off in the periphery, I'm seeing that as, who's this guy, and yet if they've already said something, I can then go, so you were saying, and pick up their piece, and suddenly they're back in the conversation. So you're holding them loosely. You're not making them go somewhere. You're holding them accountable to their collective responsibility to be present. And that is the first time I've actually said it like that. That's pretty amazing. It's holding them accountable to their responsibility and questioning their response ability, ability, and then saying, so if you've got gaps in your ability to respond to these collectively sensed emergent circumstances, what are you going to do about it? Thanks, bye. And so in that moment, they have to go, yeah, you're right. We are the ones that have to take control of this. So you're giving the power to the community to adapt and to adjust. And then you're saying, and this is where my next part of my model comes from, if a community then resonates with that and goes, wow, that was really transformative,
let's get this guy back, I would go back and spend time, this is what I'm offering to do, spend time in those communities, 6 to 8 weeks, talking to the people, depending on the size of the community, talking to the people that need to be heard, bringing them back together and having those conversations, but in ways that doesn't automatically point the finger at the individuals. So it's preserving their anonymity up to a point. And this is one of the challenges, to some extent, I think, with recording all of these things, is that if you don't know who's going to see it, it can be taken out of context. And if you don't know which parts they're going to watch, it can be taken out of context. So to be present to those people and to be responsible to those people, it's really important that you don't out them in their own communities, because then you do more harm than good. Right? And so, but you've got to be able to say, I've spoken to 30 or 40 of you in this community, and this is the collective message that I got. And when you're reading their body language, you know you're on the right track, because they're going, wow, yeah, you've nailed it. Or, I never said that. Well, that's funny, because a lot of people in this room did, and the others are all going, yeah. And they're owning up themselves. And again, in that moment, they're comparing themselves and going, how come Jack thinks this guy's actually got it right? When you spoke to me, I didn't say that. No, but everybody else did. So maybe there's something you don't know. Maybe there's another part of the elephant you haven't spotted yet. You know? And so then they're saying, you can see them thinking, so what do we need to know? What do we have to do? That's education. Then you design the curriculum to meet the requirements of the town. You don't come in with a curriculum to make the town follow the curriculum. And so this is the model I've been trying to work out for the United Nations Regional Centre of Expertise, is not to come in with a set of structured curricula that you purchase for a commercial profit, or sorry, that you purchase for the university's commercial profit, where you go off as an individual to compete in the marketplace. It's, what does this community need to do to be here in 50 years' time? And what does this community need to know to be able to do what they need to do to be here in 50 years' time? So it's, to me, it's a community-based process of what Nora Bateson talks about, with co-learning and what I would call then co-healing communities. How do we see ourselves in emergent systems context and build our own capability and maturity, so we don't need these experts? But in the meantime, who are the experts that we can trust to come into this place with humility, that we respect and invite in to bring us what we need to know, rather than these suits from the city who come in to tell us what they want us to do? And I really think I'm on the cusp of flipping the model, but because of the, and this is where I've been playing, as you would have seen, on the words of capability, maturity, and various other elements in the conversations. To me, and it's not a critical point, it's an observation. And it's not a judgment, it's an observation. I believe it's the less conscious gatekeepers who think they know the answers and have positions of power that prevent the emergence of those that they generally govern. So the politicians that think they know, the business leader who thinks he owns all the businesses in town, et cetera, or the board member who's in charge of the Sisters of Mercy, whatever it might be, who's bringing a neoliberal mindset, an assumption of power over, an assumption of understanding the system when they don't actually get it. I'm tapping into transformative thinkers at every level. Many of them are trapped inside systems that they can't challenge their own governance, because they would lose their jobs, and their jobs depend on that. So they're trapped in systems that cannot evolve while they're watching the system collapse. And that cognitive dissonance requires healing, right? But it also requires bringing out, and it has to come out communally, because if you did it one-on-one, they'd argue with you, no, who are you, mate, bugger off.
Yes.
Make sense?
Yes, totally.
Thank you so much for listening so beautifully. I'm watching your face and thinking, hoping I get to the end of his attention span. He's not glazing. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a long story, and it's very rich, and I can follow you. And it's I think it's vitally important for the globe, as you said. I think that's totally true, and I think you beautifully described the complexity process at work in the emergence of people, and it needs to be co-creation and all that. And I think you I have to rewatch this. I'm so happy this has been recorded, because it comes out so very well. So thank you so much for that.
No, thank you, because I can't write it in this way.
No.
And again, this is the emergence, right?
So, well, we have to.
The conversation asks the next question, and this is what transformative thinkers do. actor memorizers know the answers, right? So while I'm acting, I can dispel disbelief because I know the script. But if I run out of script, what next? Oh, shit, is that the time? Better go now,
Yeah.
And so the transformative thinker is asking the next question or providing the next stepping stone when they actually know, oh, I wasn't sure where we were going to go next, but here's the next piece that makes sense here. Because I could have gone in the other direction depending on what questions you asked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is it's a capability and a maturity thing, not in a judgmental way, but some people can't do it. Some people are happy to follow the text. I mean, look at most structured religions, follow the text to the letter of the law, or pretend they do,
Yes.
right? Whereas theologians are interpreting it in multiple different ways as we speak, and yet it's still being preached the same old way in the churches. Aboriginal cultures had different levels of knowledge, different levels of meaning for the same common story. Your cartoon means different things to a kid reading it as to a businessman reading it. They can associate with it, but they're thinking at different levels. Aesop's fables, any of those stories has these different levels of meaning. So it's not to say you don't get the story. It's you're not getting the story at the level that's needed for this next stage of emergence. And so if I can't take you there, then who's the person that you would respect to take you to that next level? Because if I'm the wrong person for it, then there's no point in being here. And so that's why walking in with a trusted intermediary into these communities, trust this man, he is my brother, from an Aboriginal elder or a spiritual leader or whatever. I think that's the short circuit that's required to bring, I guess, this humble, high-powered systems thinking catalysis type process into communities, because you can't walk in and say, hi, I'm here to fix everything, right? Somebody has to say, hey,
be the expert. No.
Yeah, there's this guy we know that might be able to help, right? And you come in and say, look, give me some food, give me some board, and if you like what I do, when you're successful, feed me some stuff, give me some stuff or, broaden my audience, because I can't sell a service that they don't know they need yet, right? And it's only when they suddenly go, oh, why don't we do this? How did we get to that thought? Oh, we thought of it ourselves. Yeah, but what happened? Oh, there was a guy in the room that was, prodding and poking and stirring things up and making things, and then it just came magically together. What was his name? I don't know. He sort of, wore a black cape and sort of had a fountain mask on and flew through. And so if I do it well, they don't even know I've been there. And so it's not about how do I big note myself. It's how do I make myself most beneficial.
Oh, but that's a complicated problem as well, because the name of I named my company Zicht, which is Dutch for sight. So it's about things being seen. But
Beautiful.
But sometimes I have to make myself invisible in order to be as transparent for the process and all that. So I very much recognize that this is a kind of a conundrum that you basically have to sell yourself, but that's an old meaning. And
yes.
In order to get the authority, again a wrong word, to be able to lead them to where they need to be. So this mindset kind of prevents that you get the position you need to take in order to serve the higher purpose you are all gathering around. So I very much recognize this one, but we I don't know. Maybe somebody else will help us here.
Well, again, and this is the reason that I'm approaching philanthropists, is that the existing institutions are unfortunately populated with people that are generally either trapped at levels where they can't facilitate what they know needs to happen, or unconscious or less conscious to the point where they think they're already doing it. And so I'm looking for enlightened philanthropists who have accidentally come onto riches beyond their wildest imaginations, who actually realise that business as usual is collapsing, and that the fact that they've accidentally made huge amounts of money by being the next .com or whatever hasn't changed them in terms of their spiritual or systems development, conscious systems leadership capacity. And so if I was one of them, I'd be looking for where's the best way for me to spend my time, energy, money, whatever, in the way that many of the activists I know are looking for. If I had a choice of 3 or 4 projects, which of them would I put my time and energy into? In the absence of a better option, they're going to build another phallic tower in a city or another building on a crowded university campus and pretend it's greener than the last one, you know. And they're going to hire a bunch of engineers that generally do the same thing on a university campus. I've seen this happen, you know, on a university campus that has more miners than it does, you know, greenies. And so the whole institution is set up to destroy the planet faster.
Yes,
and do the wrong thing, right? and I think if they were given a better option, they'd actually jump at a better option. But there isn't a better option on the table because all the institutions that design them are doing more of the same.
I understand what you're saying, that this is the way you think you will provide an income and do the work you want to do and be given the position to do that. So I get that. I don't have an answer either because I struggle with the same thing. I can do whatever, do what I did within companies, but then I basically am enabling the owners to make the company more successful and extract more money, and that's exactly what needs to stop. So I have this dilemma as well, and I don't have the answer yet, but for the moment I'll just kind of trust the process because it's emerging, because there's a whole more and more people like us, so to say, are connecting and meeting up and sharing, and so there's probably will find a way forward. I'll just let it go for the moment. I might become poorer in the process, but as long as I have a roof over my head and a place to sleep, and I'm fine. So we will get into that later probably. Maybe somebody who gets to see this recording might have some better ideas. And I have to thank Tammy Lee Meyer for starting this way of people connecting and having real deep conversation, real connections, because I see how helpful it is, and how helpful it is that people understand each other and listen deeply and get out what needs to get out and needs to be said, because I'm very happy with everything you told me until now. So let's, for the moment, not try to be the expert and have the answer in this complex problem, because you just explained that's impossible.
No, I get that. And this is the challenge. And you've mentioned online that you are part of another conversation group that's doing similar things that appears to have a bit more structure. I've had these conversations with other people on many occasions as well, in different structures. And so I know there are other players that are using similar mechanisms to have deep conversations, and most of the conversations I have are deep. So the question for me is, what's different about the Global Challenges Foundation process from the perspective of where my energies need to be spent in the same way yours would be the same, I imagine, at some level.
But I have two reactions before I forget them. One is that I seem to notice and observe that things start with pioneers like we are, by the way we just function, and then once we grasp it and we can word it like we do today, and we can put it down in the systems like you already have in your card, or I have in my drawings, and then you can kind of structure it, and once it's structured, other people can imitate it or get it. They don't really need to see it the way we do, but they can use it, and it trickles down and becomes more and more structured and complete and materialized, and then a certain point is so mature that it becomes common knowledge or common structures or common procedures, and then you can buy a book about it and you can have a course about it, and then it's just common knowledge. So it's into the culture. So that's, I think, the way the culture evolves and knowledge evolves, and we, not by choice, but we happen to be the pioneers inventing it, not because we want to be these big inventors, but because it just happens to us and we follow what's been offered to us. So when we give it, we are forced to kind of give it until it's received and accepted. And it's like Van Gogh. He died poor, but his pictures are sold for millions. So it's not. I think the value that we bring cannot be valued while we are kind of pioneering in this laboratory. And so I don't have a solution for that, but I think I'm happy if I just can do this work. And this
Oh, very much so. And
there was
again,
the second point I just forgot. I'll come back to that.
oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
The word, again, this is the sort of words that I've been using earlier in the conversation around transformative thinkers versus actor memorizers. You know, once you've codified the rules,
Yes,
once you've codified the
word
structure,
is better. Yes.
and so you're building a bridge, but somebody has to go out there and put their body on the line to build the bridge. Right? Yes. And that's what we're doing. We're building bridges that don't exist. I guess the point I'm making is that I'm aware of others
line again.
doing that.
Great one-liner. We're building bridges that don't exist. Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, I call them bridges of boats, right? Because you don't have to be on one boat, and you don't have to build the only boat. But if you can align the boats and people are happy on the boat they're on, you know, they can stay on that boat. But if you bring another boat up alongside, it looks like a better boat, but it looks seaworthy and for the conditions that you're aware of, and it looks like it's got a trustworthy crew. Then you might feel comfortable to step across the gunnels. And if you line up a few boats between here and that other shore that you can't quite see yet, and then lay some transformative practices across the top of those, then you've got a bridge that others can follow. And so when you're acting on behalf of the whole, you're actually trying to create an infrastructure of intent that's going to get those that can't see how to do it yet further faster. Because if you're just doing it for yourselves, then humanity collapses. And this is where the and comes in, there's people that have been doing that for millennia, but they're doing it from different perspectives that are now disrespected to some extent in the faiths and other places. And this is what I've been learning with the eco-spiritual women. And this amazing process that they've got of listening in. And they have a session where they literally ask, what's happening now? I don't know why my camera keeps zooming in and zooming out. I'm not zooming in closer. Camera sometimes zooms right up to my nose. I think it's thinking, is he still there? Yeah, I'm still here. Hello. What are you experiencing now is the question that's asked. And then you have 5 minutes to explain, what am I experiencing now? The other person stands in silence. And then you do it the other way. And you deepen that experience each time. But to me, that's really important. I think that's an element that we haven't quite gone as far as yet in Global Challenges Foundation, but it's hinting towards that. So at the moment, the approach that's being taken here is midway between deeper processes that I've been part of and shallower processes that I've been part of. But I know those processes, I know where those people are. We could go in both directions or in either direction. It comes down to the intention of the individuals and the collective, which then comes down to what is it we're trying to achieve here. And in the case of the eco-spiritual sisters, it's greater intention to be in the now for what's emerging for me now in the broader faith and understanding of the planet and complexity and so on. So it's the universe story and who am I in this picture, and what does that mean to me and to humanity. In the case of a more instrumental project, like designing something or building an app or co-designing a city, and you'd say, well, that purpose is slightly different, and we can use mindful processes to get us to deeper engagement, to get us to better outcomes. And that's part of what I've been doing with these communities, is sensing into that. But I'm holding loosely that the deeper spiritual connection, which I have limited experience in, but I'm getting, I think, better at through having been exposed to it, and the less deep but more intentional action that comes through building infrastructure and physically creating stuff. Most of the budget currently is going towards building more stuff with the wrong design because they haven't done this thinking. And my sense is the Global Challenges Foundation stuff is somewhere in the middle at the moment, which is saying, how do we govern better? And we're saying, how do we bring in more of this conscious and self-conscious and multiple selves conscious thinking into things we can do together. So what is it we can do together that we can't do alone? But we're starting from a deeper starting point, but only if we actually agree that this is the depth we want to try and capture, and this is the sort of intentions we're aiming for. And I guess because I've got those other options available to me, I'm questioning how much energy do I put into this particular one, given that I could be here or anywhere in between. And by the way, there's people who want to pull me over to here without this stuff, and there's people who want to pull me over to here without this stuff. And so I do see a value in what we're doing, but I as others would say here, they wouldn't have time to watch 2 hours of Neil and Harry talking, but they wouldn't value in it unless they did.
Yes.
And so
we'll have to
what is our mechanism?
There's a need for distillation, of course, of everything that's shared, but there are some gems in it. Yes. And
that's the thing that we don't yet have.
Oh, wow. So, okay.
I'm not sure. Time flies. But
could be. And it's I've seen with other conversations Tammy hosts as well, that they're extremely interesting, but it absorbs a lot of time to kind of take it in. And so it's like watching television all night, binge watching. I can't do that. No. So
and if you want to capture, I'll just finish your point. It's like watching television, but you have to pay attention. And if you're having to pay attention to every moment, then you can't do other things. And this is the point, that with limited time on this planet, this time around, can I afford to spend 3 or 4 hours a day watching videos?
Let's agree on that. We have to work on this, but
I know
there's a value that, at least for us, and we might do something and make it more easier to communicate. So that's a technical problem, and I feel the need to wrap up. It's early. It's almost noon here. I still have to have breakfast because.
I'm still having my breakfast.
Yeah. Australian breakfast. Right. Okay, but let me try to. I would suggest we wrap up and have another conversation. And of course, since we've connected this way, we can't stop. I'm rather certain of that. So, maybe we could have another conversation about your card deck, because the card deck is kind of a distillation of everything you learned as well, and you use those as a stepping stones to facilitate conversations. And I think this is kind of modular meta knowing that you have captured in these cards. So you have a whole lot of value there. And that's interesting, because if you're talking about codifying and making it available for people on a lower level and make more generally available for people, so if you run under a train, this does not get lost. That's one thing. And another thing, you talk about spiritual on one side and the practical on the other side. Spiritually is also about the principles that form the universe, whether God created or whatever it comes from. These are the founding principles of everything that happens. And I just want to very short to say, principles form patterns. And patterns, they create forms, processes, and everything that comes. So my thinking gravitates towards this way of trying to have a kind of more available international language to look at complexity that way. So there's a lot of stuff happening there. And I would also mention, before we get it, you have many more people doing that. You have the ULab in America doing things about getting people collectively together and collective emergence. And there's the art of hosting, and there's so many stuff happening. So it also would be interesting to kind of get a list of what's currently happening, because there's so much to be done, and it's not necessary that everybody invents his own wheel and then start fighting of what the best wheel will be going forward. So is that for the moment? I'm kind of getting tired, and 2 hours of watching. Oh, you're zooming in beautifully.
No, stop.
No, this is interesting. People.
I don't know why my camera does that, but it's a bit frightening, isn't it? I need to check that.
Yeah, that's great. I fell with my bike. I'm happy mine doesn't do that. But could we just agree that
I might have to see. There's probably a setting in there that says follow face or something. I don't know why. Maybe it's the shiny head or something.
I can't even zoom, so I'm kind of jealous now.
I didn't press any buttons, honest. I just do this. I just zoom in and zoom out automatically, you know. If I can perhaps I love what you're saying there, Harry. It's in the synthesis, right? the analysis is the
Analysis
one
and synthesis, and those juggling those. Yes.
yeah, the analysis is looking for the pieces. The synthesis is seeing the patterns, right? And so science is often about the analysis of the patterns that already exist.
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
Whereas spirituality is more coming from these are the patterns, and now what are the pieces that fit into those patterns? But my sense is that a lot of the spiritual wisdoms are actually clearly stated, synthesized, analyses, and so they're actually based on deep observation in systems context, now turned into words which make universal sense because. And so the power of what I experienced wasn't from a religious perspective with the Sisters of Mercy. It was from the fact that they were honouring what I was bringing, which was a secular, complex, adaptive systems perspective that was humble to the enormity of the universe. And they're coming from the universe story as their story for the equivalent of God. So not a bearded man in heaven who made all this stuff, but a creative life force based on emergence and evolution. So there's a beautiful marriage between what I was doing from science and what they were doing from spirituality. And so the eco-spirituality to me is that connection here of people in systems context with a reverence for the bigger picture, which is that nobility and humility again. And it also links to linked social ecological systems, which is every human system on the planet. Right? So we're either destroying the systems we live in or we're actually honouring the systems we live in. And the physical work I'm trying to do is in that space of how do we recreate environments that can sustain humans, because humans are sustaining those environments. And that requires understanding that complexity. So my sense is you and I are sort of neo-generalists who are helping others that already have many of the pieces to see those patterns in simpler systems context. Once that happens, they will run off with those pieces thinking they know the answers until the next time the system starts to collapse. So there are different quantum levels of whether it's consciousness or whatever. Don't worry, mate, I know boats, I've got the answer. Thank you very much, you can go now. Hang on, there's a deeper thing you didn't see. That's all. Okay. All right, sorry. And so the humility of not being here is, if that's all you wanted to get from it, then I'm sorry, my time here is done. If and when you get to the next question, call me. But if you know the answer already, there's no point, because you don't need somebody if you already know the answer. So we are people that are helping them to better define the next question. We are assisting them to become transformative thinkers rather than actor memorizers. And so they're getting rid of their old texts. They're not getting rid of their old faith in the texts. They're saying these parts are still relevant. How do we reinterpret those texts with a different set of eyes because somebody showed us a different pattern? And that's the stuff that I'm trying to play with.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Okay, that's out.
Thank you, my friend. It's been really wonderful, Harry. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for listening so beautifully. I do feel this has been a really great conversation, and I'd like to watch it again as well, because
yes,
a lot of the stuff that I say comes through rather than comes out. Cool. And so to see it again is to see how I responded. And so just to finish on, if I was to show my cards, as you were suggesting as a way of talking, I'd like a nucleus around which to focus that. So a focal question to say, how would I lead towards this? And I want to do it interactively rather than, here's my story. And this is the challenge that I've had for a long time in terms of either developing a website or a book or anything else, is when I write the story in a linear fashion, it doesn't look as good. Right?
Yeah, we'll get back to that as well, yes.
Has to have people in the room going, wow, this is great, keep going.
Yes.
And so that's the willingness and the openness and the acceptance and the hearing and the listening I'm looking for, is not, did you like my book? It's, did you like my next card? Oh, sorry, I've got another card. And so there's both an urgency but also a reticence to get this stuff down. Because if I get it down, people will think they already know the answer. And I don't even know the answer myself. So it's, how do we codify better questions? And if I can, every time I have these conversations, I refine my own understandings because I articulate it differently. So the story isn't told the same way twice. There's similar elements, differently composed and brought together in different ways. And there's bits that I haven't said, and there's so much that I couldn't write. So I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense, and it is basically a seed for the next conversation.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic, Gary.
Let's stop and let's reconnect. And once we've ourselves already digested all of this. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, Harry. Take care. Bye.